Good evening, this is Derek Sanderson with the New York Talkers. Tonight my guest is going to be Michele Lacey, a history major, and we'll be talking about history. They'll be coming away in just a minute. This is radio station WFRE. We're on the air Tuesday nights from 8 to 11 o'clock. Well, when I think, aside from science and mathematics, history comes number 3 is the most boring to students. I don't like it, I don't want to take it. Why are they doing this to me? I've had some theories on shows with Paul Reese about why math and science are boring. Why do you think history is boring to the common person?
I don't think it's the subject itself that's boring. I think it's how it's presented. It's boring. You're dealing with characters in the past, and in order to make students appreciate them, you have to make them come to life. I think it's all in the presentation of the material. And it's traditional in America. Americans are future-looking. They're not interested in the past that much. So that's one of the major reasons why Americans don't like history. In Europeans, you'll never find that. When European educators come over there, they're amazed how little Americans know of their own history. Because Americans are more future-looking. They have no sense of history whatsoever.
I think maybe the bicentennial has helped for people to realize the heritage a little more. And the novels by John Lake's, The Seekers.
Yeah. I really don't think so. I don't think anyone who didn't appreciate history before only seen the 4th of July as something to celebrate. I don't really think it had anything to do with encouraging an interest in our past. I think what more so than the bicentennial would be roots.
That was a very good historical account.
Yeah, that brought up an interest in our personal past, but in trying to find your personal history, you would get involved in general history.
Trying to find out if you're related to anyone or whatever.
Sure. If you find out you have relatives who were in the Civil War and the American Revolution, you might become more interested in it.
Mm-hmm. This is my belief that we're ultimately related to Java Man. But let's not get into that. Another question is, what can we learn from history? That's to make history come alive, to make the characters come alive. One of my history teachers told me that he believes that history is like a philosophy. That we could perhaps learn things from it.
You can, maybe on an abstract level, but you can't draw analogies between something that happened 2 years ago and something that's happening today, because it's a whole completely different experience. I think, let's say, maybe general experiences that happen in history we can learn from, but you can't compare, let's say, the 20th century, even with 200 years ago, with the 18th century. It's a completely different time. You're dealing with a completely different society. You're dealing with completely different factors involved in society today. It's hard. I know, that's a tough question. As a history major, all professors tell you that. You cannot. People do that automatically. You will draw, well, that's the same as today, and you're always warned against that. Don't draw analogies. You can't.
But can we learn anything from Hitler's killing of 5 million Jews? We can learn not to kill Jews, but maybe Jews will be killed again for other reasons. Maybe Italians will be killed again for other reasons.
I don't think that's the lesson to be learned from Hitler at all.
Mm-hmm.
The lesson that I think that they should have learned from World War I, which could have prevented World War II. But from Hitler was, I think Hitler awakened the West a little bit. The West is very, as far as has always been for the past 200 years, very idealistic in regards to foreign policy. They didn't see Hitler for what he was, which almost ended in our destruction. The West they didn't see him as an imperialist, someone who wanted to conquer the whole world. They were blind to that, and there are lessons repeatedly since ancient time in history where they could have learned from that. Someone of his character, especially the German people, their own history. They're very nationalistic. Munich, for instance. I mean, the most stupidest thing to think that he's only going to be satisfied part of Czechoslovakia. The man was out to conquer the world, and there's a big historical debate about that, whether World War II could have been prevented if we had realized his objectives in time instead of being in another world. I don't know.
Hitler used history when you speak with his annexation of Austria. He had worked out a case, a pretty convincing case, where he showed the Austrian and the German as ancient brothers. So we're just back together anyway. We're not bothering anybody.
Yeah, but he used it just to justify his own plans. He didn't use it concretely to help himself. He could have looked at Napoleon and seen he wasn't going to get Russia in the winter. He was not going to conquer Russia, and he could have
lost
saved
the
himself.
same way.
And you can't fight a war on two different fronts. He could have learned that from history. He was a student. He did study history, did study Napoleon, but he ignored that. That was his own ego. Well, with Hitler, you're not dealing with a rational man. I mean,
well, he saw.
his ego was so strong that he thought he could overcome all the obstacles that Napoleon. He would have, if he had learned from Napoleon, he could have probably won the war. But his mistake was our game.
There's a lot of question of Mussolini. Why did he need this guy? And I think it was because Italy has Rome in it, and in his mind, he thought himself as wanting to become a Roman king.
I don't think Hitler needed Mussolini. I think Mussolini needed Hitler more.
Right. That's what I said. There are a lot of questions. Why did he really need
Why did he
him?
even bother with him? He thought he was an idiot. Hitler. Well, he didn't have any nice words for anybody, but he didn't think much of Mussolini. I think it was really Mussolini who, clung to him more than Hitler didn't need him.
But with the Germans and the Austrians, we've seen that history can be used by way of propaganda for bad things.
Oh, sure.
It can probably be used to a good end also.
Yeah, sure.
Then Hitler in the early 30s said in his book Mein Kampf, I believe it's pronounced, that exactly what he was going to do.
Right, but no one believed him.
They just figured that this Nazi party is homegrown and that'll save us from communism.
Well, the Germans, ever since the time of Napoleon, when nationalism first started to gain strength in Europe, Germans are very nationalistic people and very militaristic people. And anybody in Germany in the 30s could tell. I don't know. I can't understand how they didn't see the temper of the people. They were so humiliated by the Versailles Treaty. That's the thing that Hitler used to gain support. I mean, it was the people themselves. When you're dealing with a foreign country, you can't only look at their leaders. You have to look at the people, their character, their national character. Anyone could have seen that Hitler wasn't only out just to get the parts of territory where the Germans lived.
The Polish corridor is what did it, cutting Germany in two pieces.
Yeah.
That was one of the more ridiculous parts of the treaty. They were just punished for starting the war.
They were humiliated. Previously in history, no country was ever treated the way Germany did. Germany wasn't even. Usually, when a peace treaty is signed after a war, both the victor and the defeated make the terms of the treaty. Okay, it's never usually one side. Versailles was the first time it was. Germany was handed the treaty, and they had to sign it. They had no choice to sign it, and the people were against it. There was a minority. I forget exactly who it was, but the people who did sign the treaty for the German people were a minority in their own country. Minority as far as the government went. They weren't the major party, and they were stripped. They were humiliated, and World War II was a way of getting back.
Germany had Hitler and France had Napoleon.
Right.
Around the time of our revolution, Napoleon was doing the same thing, and
but
Europe didn't learn.
was,
I mean, they're neighbors.
Yeah, but it's hard to compare Napoleon and Hitler. Napoleon thought that Napoleon was an idealist. He was trying to spread the idea that the French Revolution throughout Europe. He was
against the kings, the divine right of kings,
yeah.
all of that. He did some very good things.
He did. He was the only, after his empire broke down was when all the countries in Eastern Europe started getting constitutions and legislatures and the whole thing. He instituted that. So he wasn't a nut. You can't really, I don't know.
He wasn't a maniac.
No, he wasn't a maniac. He was out for the glory of France. He was an imperialist too. He was trying to conquer Europe and have it under, subservient to France, but he still was an idealist. He hid his real purposes under this idealism.
Another thing that Napoleon did was he started the excavation of the pyramids to impress his officers. He took all his main officers to Egypt, and he said, there are 40 centuries looking down on you, and learn from these people. And he started Egyptology, and a lot of his war maneuvers come out of what they did. And he also learned from the Hittites, but the Hittites had an advantage. They were in the Iron Age, and nobody else was.
And he really wasn't he was a dictator, but he wasn't as bad as Hitler. No way.
What about some other types of rulers, like Joseph Stalin? Is there any difference? Is there any difference between a left-wing dictator and a right-wing dictator?
No. I think the communist dictators in Russia aren't much different than the previous czars in Russia. Russia was always an autocratic nation, even before the communists took in. The reason why everyone sees communism as a dictatorship, people are oppressed, but it took that form in Russia because that was the form of government they always had. The laws, people couldn't leave Russia in the time of the czars, the same they can't leave Russia today. They had no freedom under the czars like they don't today. They never had any liberty in Russia. It wasn't only started under communism. Stalin wasn't the first dictator. All the czars in Russia were dictators. They all were.
In fact, one Russian czar was affected by Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln
he freed his serfs.
But they killed Alexander and made it look like a serf did it, and then the Tsar took control again.
I don't know much.
Put the serfs back in.
I'm vague on Russian history.
Well,
that's
what happened. The serfs were not free for that long.
Well, the serfs were freed in Europe hundreds of years before, so you see how backwards Russia was. That was in the 1860s. The serfs had been freed in Western Europe for a long time. It's the 15th century practically. So that you see the difference between Eastern and Western Europe.
But when are they going to come boiling out of the pot? Is Solzhenitsyn the beginning? Is Solzhenitsyn Thomas Paine of a different type?
I don't know. I really can't answer that. I don't
really
see
like
any
to see what's going to happen.
Civil liberty in Russia. I don't. You only have a scattered few who are doing this. You don't know how the Russian people feel.
So what they do with history is just...
These are only a few intellectuals. Okay.
What they do with history is they just keep doing the same thing over and over
again, yeah.
On the Russian scene.
As far as Russia goes, yeah.
In one of his books, Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher, he lived in the latter part of the 1800s. He said that the value of history is that philosophy can be placed in time and looked at non-objectively for the time that it's in and appreciated that way.
I agree, but it's not always used like that. Philosophy is good for a certain time in history. I agree with him completely, but it's not always used that way. For instance, the rationalism that came out of the Enlightenment, in the 18th century, that was used mainly as a tool by the middle class to overthrow the aristocracy, But this rationalism is still used today. It's spread to every phase of life, and it's out of place in the modern world. And that's how the West deals in politics. This rationalism, the West still believes that Russia can have civil liberties, It still believes that. It did the same idealism that made Chamberlain sign the Munich Agreement. This rationalism as far as politics goes, they see the world as once everybody has democratic governments, okay, and the people are enlightened, there's going to be one single universe, everyone's going to get along. And they still think like that today. Carter with his human rights is a good example. Wilson with his war of democracy. Well, that philosophy does not, people, number one, are not rational. That whole philosophy, I think, is a lot of nonsense. But it served its time and place at that, and I mean, this country was founded on those ideals, but it no longer serves today. Not in the modern world. You can't apply that rationalism.
Do you think rationalism...
Like social scientists do constantly in everything, nowadays.
Like forcing black majority rule in Africa?
Yeah. Things like all the liberals today, that's what their whole philosophy is. That it all stems from that rationalism, from the Enlightenment. We never got rid of that, and that's crazy. It has no place today, none whatsoever. Served its time in the 18th century, but that's it.
So you say be careful of things that are self-evident, because they never ask themselves the question, by what standard is it self-evident?
Right. Right, that's true. Like you can't, I don't know, you can't, like today, people are, well, it's not exactly philosophy, but the individualism of the 19th century America, okay? People would like to see that back then. They don't want welfare. Or the social legislation that is being passed today. But there's no place for it today. This is the 20th century. It's completely different than the 19th century. You can't live in the past. You can't, like Carter, he wants to give more authority back to the states. You can't today. No way. There has to be a centralized government. The government is going to grow bigger. It has to, in order to deal with modern problems. You can't have a strong state government today.
You think that things will get done sooner with a strong federal government, rather than the states just fighting each other and fighting the federal government?
Sure, more efficient. But today, there's so many problems of today. You can't leave things to be done on a local level. But people want that. Again,
with the value of history, from Nietzsche's book, Hermann Hesse was affected by that, and he wrote a book called The Glass Bead Game, where it takes place in the future in the 2200s, and men had reduced knowledge to a game like an abacus. It was all symbolistic. You could go from a symphony of Chopin into Bernoulli's Equation, and back to something by Mozart, and into the rise and fall of the Third Reich. But one thing they didn't study was history. They took everything out of context, and what grew about this game was that only certain games were permitted. No new knowledge was introduced into the game, and what was put forth was that these people couldn't really rebel against it because they had no precedent. The knowledge of history was lost. They couldn't conceive of the idea of revolution.
Well, for instance...
And creativity had been destroyed by this game. Creativity had been destroyed by knowledge, one of the strangest things. So he shows us the value of history, because it helps to place everything. It's important that Dante lived when he did, right. Not if people thought that he lived today, because he favored monarchy over democracy. He did for several reasons, and it belongs in
the 14th century. Well, precedent is important. For instance, the founding of this country, without the democracies in ancient Greece, I mean, we weren't the first to invent them. They got all their knowledge about democracies and republics from Aristotle and Plato, from the ancient Greeks. I mean, that was a precedent set. If it wasn't for the democracies in ancient Greece, we might not have one today.
Right, if that was lost.
If it was lost.
If we didn't know about them.
Right. We might be living under Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, we've always seen ourselves as an extension of the ancient Greeks. Our architecture, why do you think the White House is built the way it is, the columns on the buildings?
Yeah, well, at that time, there was a revival of classical Greece in America at that time, in the 18th century when they were built, in the early 19th century. But you don't see buildings being built today like that.
No.
They should be.
Now they look like elevator buttons.
Right. They should be built today like that. And sure, precedent is important.
But just with that thought in mind, America rolled forward, and we had Emerson, Thoreau, Poe, Whitman.
Yeah, but also we had
Dickinson.
the society, the type of society that was capable of having a democracy. You couldn't have implemented in the 18th century a democracy in England or France. So that's what I mean. You can't. If King George decided he started to read Plato or whatever and decided he wanted democracy, they didn't have the society for democracy. We did. So we went. That's what I mean about you can't. In a sense, you can't draw analogies. All right, our society at that time was right for democracy. We had socially. I mean, we had it. Europe didn't at that time. Okay, so you couldn't have placed a democracy or a republic at that time in Europe. But we had the type of society that was right for.
What's wrong with us now? Have we just gotten too big?
Yeah.
And the bigger you get, the more restrictions on your freedom. This business with the cars and everything, it all comes in.
Sure, bureaucracy. You have to have a bureaucracy now. I mean, you can't compare 20th century America with 18th century America. Speaking about cosmopolitan, technologically advanced society with a agrarian, scattered towns here and there. It's completely different. Then it was all right to have local government. Could you picture everybody in Brooklyn going to a town meeting? I mean,
it might be better that way.
No way, not today. We never need to know that.
Do you think there would just be wars between little groups and everything?
Sure there would. We have a pluralistic society. The only thing that you have to have, you have to have a centralized government to make that work. But no, I don't think you could have a pluralistic society on a local scale. You would have too many fights with different groups. There's so many people that belong to. Right, you're a Catholic, you have interest in them. You're an Italian, you have your interest here. And then you belong to a labor union, you have interest there. It's the government that really stabilizes all that. I don't think you could have that.
What about this? The corporate structure. A lot of people draw analogies to feudalism.
To the corporate structure?
Right. Here you can stand on the lawn of the White House and curse out Carter and nothing can happen to you because that's part of your freedom. But if
you can't do that in your office.
Right. So they say the freedom isn't here because it's where the pressure is being applied.
It is. It is in a sense because corporations today, all right, in the medieval world, their society was like an organism. Okay, each person had his place, and each helped for the sake of the whole. Okay, there was a sense of community there, but each helped for the whole. And the same thing's in a corporation. Okay, there's each different part, a hierarchy, and each helps for the sake of the whole thing. Yeah, sure it is. Yeah. It's a good analogy.
Well, we're gonna take a short break right now, and we'll be back in a few minutes with more talk with Michele Lacey. This is radio station WFRE, 540 on your dial in New York.
We're getting away from history.
suspicions run wild. The secret is about to unfold. Upstairs before the night's too old. The night, it's gonna be alright. 'Cause I love you, girl. Ain't nobody gonna stop us now. Mon Dieu, qu'est-ce qu'il va dire maman? Mon amour, viens me sucrer, embrasse-moi. Je t'adore beaucoup. Les amis. Oh, oui, cette nuit, l'ami.
My guest tonight is Michele Lacey, a history major, and we'll be continuing our discussion on history. What I'd like to ask you is the role of religion in history. Do you think it has had a significant role?
Oh, sure it has. Religion was the dominant in Western Europe since its creation. It dominated Western Europe. I don't think today it does. I don't think today it has any role whatsoever. But it has in the past. In Europe, up until, let's say, really the 19th century, I'd say. Most of the wars fought in Europe were religious wars, or had some religious connotation or other. The religion dominated most of their life. Look, the course of history was changed because of religion, the Protestant Reformation.
And a main platform of the colonies was religious freedom.
Right, yeah.
Along with political freedom.
Right, most of the reason that the people escaped from Europe was because of religious persecution. I said before that it really doesn't apply today, but I'm wrong. You have the Irish Catholics fighting Irish Protestants in Ireland, and you have the Israelis fighting the Arabs. I mean, religion isn't the main factor there, but it does play a part with their different cultures.
And they just fell into a conditioned role where they don't like one another. It's not really
right, but
it's not really a religious theory that they're fighting over.
If it wasn't for the Jews being persecuted in Western Europe, they wouldn't be in Israel. They wouldn't have sought to find a homeland. They wouldn't have fled. I mean, Israel was founded by European Jews who fled Europe, so.
After World War I, when the mandate was picked up.
Right. So it does to an extent, but I think a small extent. I don't think it plays a dominant role like it used to, because religion isn't the primary force in people's lives today like it once was.
But people like the Reverend Moon and Hare Krishna can still gain power.
Those are exceptions.
The Jesus freaks, but the Christians were an exception.
How much power are they gaining?
Slowly but surely. I mean, how long did it? Christ was crucified. St. Peter went to Rome, and there were all kinds of persecutions. But a few hundred years later, they started to win out, and then you have Constantine, the emperor, who's a Christian.
Well, I don't see Reverend Moon and Hare Krishnas in that light. I don't know. I just think they're strange. But I guess the Jews and the Romans thought the Christians are strange too. So it's hard. But I still don't think religion is that dominant a force today like it was once.
What about the role of philosophy in history?
For me, that's a tough question, because I myself am a realist. I don't buy philosophy that much. As far as I see philosophy's role in history, philosophy, I think, is always used by, I'm talking about politicians now, not by people, because a lot of people do believe it. And I think it's used by politicians to just either justify what they're doing or to cover up their real motives. But that's my own view, because I'm a realist myself. I don't believe in idealism, but as far as historians go, well, philosophy does play, to them, a prominent role in what goes on. But I think its role, I think it's used sometimes as a means to gather support from the masses by politicians, because people do believe in things. I can't say people don't, but I don't see as things happening in history because of a certain philosophy.
Well, when philosophy changes, countries can fall apart if they change significantly.
Yeah.
It can destroy industries. It can.
Well, what kind of philosophy are you talking about? What kind of philosophy
Well,
can destroy industry?
What kind of philosophy? Just anything goes. The anything goes philosophy can cause society to break down, because just like anything goes, like in museums, you have pure white canvases hanging there, or a pair of dungarees nailed to a canvas.
Mm-hmm.
If that's art, then everything is art.
Mm-hmm.
The smacked up back of a Cadillac is art,
yeah.
and there can be no art.
Well, I agree with that.
If everything,
to do with philosophy.
If everything is one thing, then that one thing cannot exist. But that's what philosophy is. Philosophy is a thing is what it is. Philosophy is common sense. It's not something so far-flung that nobody can understand it. Philosophy goes on, a thing is what it is, and a man is what he is.
And I don't see philosophy in that way. I don't know, when you sit...
Well, wherever there are people thinking...
I'm speaking about, you say has philosophy changed history. Well, the philosophy that you're talking about is not... What I understood you to be talking about is not the philosophy of the farmer down, in the next village. It's the philosophy of thinkers. Okay? Who have made a mark? Philosophers. All right, everybody in their own way is a philosopher, like you said. Okay, everyone believes in certain things. But then again, you can draw a line between, all right, how do you distinguish a philosophy from a value?
Because they should be the same thing.
I mean, anything goes to me, that's a value. That's not a philosophy.
But it's part
I believe in, let's think of something. I believe in civil liberties. I believe that it's something like that. Everybody's equal, or anything like that.
But values come out of philosophy. If philosophers desert us,
Well,
it's like one domino knocks down the next one, because values go.
That's true. Yeah.
If we had, if we suddenly went over to wild orgies in office buildings and everything, I mean, constantly, things would change significantly.
You're saying that values change because philosophies don't work anymore. People, what you're saying is because people have nothing to believe in. People have no more ideals.
Right, because they don't see the ideals.
Well, I don't think that has ever happened in the course of history. When you're talking, I don't know, when I study history, we study philosophy, but we study major thinkers. I mean, their ideas.
What about Immanuel Kant? He has the distinction of offending both the scientific and the religious establishment on his critique of pure reason.
I never read it.
Well, he invalidated pure reason. He said that nothing. He said he just threw pure reason out the window.
That there was
no such thing.
I agree, 100%.
Because, but he did that by ignoring the fact that a thing is what it is.
Yeah.
That glass is glass.
Right,
glass is not glass. It can be wood and cardboard and everything. But
is that what he's saying?
But a word. See, it's just a word game. Words if they don't explain, if one word doesn't mean one thing, the language becomes meaningless.
Right.
That's the way he was able to get his point over. And there's Kant, and then there's his contemporary George Hegel, and then comes Karl Marx. And philosophy is affecting history because Lenin picks it up. Hegel gets a few things from Kant, and the dialectic he develops, and Marx takes the dialectic further.
I want to make a point right there what you said.
And this is just a group of thinkers, and now there are two countries.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
China and Russia.
But you didn't have the whole population in Russia believing in Karl Marx. How many people in Russia read Karl Marx? Lenin wasn't even in.
Right.
The Russian Revolution
And how many people?
started before Lenin even got there. So there would have been there was a Russian Revolution before Lenin or Karl Marx got in there. The ordinary people in Russia had concrete abuses. What's the word I'm thinking of? Complaints. Okay, and they wanted the government to do something about it. Karl Marx did not cause. This is what I can't see in history. How they will say the same with the American Revolution. Without the Enlightenment, there wouldn't have been how many. The ordinary farmer. Americans, number one, are very pragmatic. Americans are not philosophical. They never were. How many great American philosophers do you have? Very few. Americans are very pragmatic people. They've always been very pragmatic. All right, Jefferson and all them. Sure, they brought Franklin. He brought the Enlightenment to America. How many people do you think read that? You think they were fighting the Revolution because of they had read these things? No. They wanted to be independent because of practical reasons, not because of any abstract philosophy.
But that was brought in. That was
used by them.
By the head of
to gather the masses. That's all it was, and that's how philosophy affects history, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, because one person
in
picks
Russia.
up on
Don't say Karl Marx caused the Russian.
No,
without Karl Marx, there would have been a Russian Revolution. It might not have turned. Lenin was in Germany at the time. He wasn't even there. The Russian Revolution was on for 3 years before. Didn't you know that? Germans sent him out of there in a locked subway car, so he couldn't get out. He was causing trouble in Germany. Lenin thought that there was going to be a revolution anywhere. It would be in Germany. And the German people, their government, put him in a train in a locked subway car with sealed windows so he couldn't get out, and took him into Russia. Karl Marx came in. He came in on the rebound, for God's sake. That was.
Well, he was against Lenin was against capitalism.
Lenin's one person.
And he rallied the people.
Lenin affected history. Okay, and Lenin read Karl Marx, okay, but there would have been, he just turned the revolution around to fit his own purposes, okay, to fit his own philosophy. So that's how I think philosophy affects history.
But it's really important the way it does.
It is important how it does, but it doesn't pay. I think, as far as I'm concerned, there would have been an American Revolution whether there was an Enlightenment. Whether there wasn't an Enlightenment, there would have been. For plain practical reasons.
And on the other side,
sooner. That was the only thing that happened.
On the other side, you have Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. How many people have read Thomas Jefferson? Well, they know that he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he was our third president.
I know. Well, Americans, you study American history, American society. Americans do not. They never have. Americans are very pragmatic people. They always have. All right, they might, you might get like in World War I, a war cry, say they're off democracy, the patriotism gets everybody stirred up, but they don't. Americans are not like idealistic. Americans have always been very pragmatic. So as far as philosophy causing, that's a lot of bull. And philosophy do not.
But philosophy affects people, and one person affects other people.
It affects people. But I'm not saying it's the cause.
No, it's not the main cause, but it's one of it.
It's one of it.
One is people getting sick of the way they're being put down.
A lot of people make... No, not that type of philosophy. That to me is not a philosophy. People getting sick of being put down.
No, but they rise up. They rise up just to overthrow. they don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, but I'm not. But that's not. I don't know.
You
I
can
don't consider that pure philosophy.
No, it's not pure philosophy, but that's what causes. That's history.
Yeah,
Revolution
that's what
is
causes
history.
change.
But what causes revolution? What causes revolution is
Oh, new
philosophy.
ideas. Yeah, sure.
There's John. Way back in the time of Shakespeare, there was Francis Bacon and John Locke, Hobbes, and then comes Paine and Jefferson, and those were just thinkers. See, people if they learn more about philosophy, I feel, will know what's happening, will know who's manipulating them for what reason.
You get Hobbes. All right. Well, Hobbes is the monarchy, right? Get Hobbes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You get. All right. Someone like John Locke. He wrote his treatise. He's done 2 treatises on government in the 17th century. All right. He was a thinker in London, and that was a highly publicized book. Hobbes wrote, I think, if I remember correctly, his Leviathan in answer to, I think, Locke, if I'm not mistaken. No, wait. No, Hobbes is before Locke. No, I'm wrong on that one. Anyway, why didn't Locke's philosophy, Locke wrote on constitutional government. I mean, the Declaration of Independence, all Thomas Jefferson did was paraphrase him. The whole Declaration of Independence is taken from Locke. All he did was paraphrase him. Why didn't it hit in England at that time?
Like you said, they just didn't have the government, the George III
And they didn't have the
crowd.
society. And they didn't have. That's the most important thing, not the philosophy.
But eventually it works its way up. If people get into philosophy, they'll know how they're being manipulated.
The times were changing. That's why the government in England changed. Not that philosophy worked its way up. The times were changing. The modern world was evolving. And I don't think it had anything to do with John Locke and his 2 treatises on government that was written in the 17th century. Okay,
but somebody had to say it.
I mean, you're talking about, so let's take England for an example now. Okay, let's take England. All right, Parliament now is the main government in England. All right, Parliament was there for centuries. Parliament didn't become powerful until King Henry VIII decided to make himself the head of the Anglican Church or whatever. Okay, that's when Parliament got more power in England. All right, not as powerful as they are today, but they became a really legislative body, more than just they became more powerful and on their way to becoming a legislative body, more so than they had been previously. They were really just an advisory body. And now that was a major step in England, leading up to what it is today. That had nothing to do with philosophy. That's a very practical reason.
Okay.
Philosophy only catches on where it is needed. That's it. Things will happen.
Where somebody needs
will happen without it. Things will happen without it. All right, let's take.
Well, there's always somebody that comes before that they can't pick up on.
The American Revolution before it started, before all the talk of the Enlightenment, before Jefferson, for everybody. Okay. American society before the Revolution, in the middle of the 18th century. Okay. Before any talk of the independence or any of this nonsense came in. American society was much, a prelude to what it was today. Completely different from England. It was very competitive. You had a commercial capitalism, not a merchant capitalism, not like it was today. But the same battles we have today was starting, and in that time they had local governments, assemblies here were very strong in the United States. England had neglected the colonies, hadn't really had them under their thumb for over 100 years. Okay, and it was when England decided to try and start dominating the colonies that the people rebelled. That had nothing to do with philosophy. Nothing to do with philosophy at all. That's why that was the practical reason why they rebelled. The colonies were hurting financially from the laws England passed. The Americans at that time, I'd say 20, 30 years before, were ready to be independent from England. In fact, one of the reasons that's given for the analogy is always drawn between England and the United States, between an adolescent and a parent. When you reach adolescence, you want to be independent. You don't want to have tight reins on you. Okay? You want to have your freedom. And that's an analogy that is drawn. And was talked about before the Thomas Paine's common sense moment, before there was any thought of philosophy. These things happened before then. The seeds were already there.
But the seeds
were already for practical reasons. Nothing to do with philosophy. Nothing. We had
But don't you think that people begin to think? You have to think before you act.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about...
There were radicals being persecuted all along.
What? No, this was before any of that started. No radicals were persecuted until after the Stamp Act. That was in 1760-something. That started...
There were no
right after the
dissidents at all?
Revolution.
Everybody was thoroughly and completely
England
happy?
was like England wasn't even the mother country over here. They had nothing to do with the colonies at all. It's called a period, I think it's a salutary neglect. Nothing at all. The only reason the first time England ever attacked the colonies was the Stamp Act. That's why they rebelled. They didn't think that they should be taxed by England, by Parliament, because they weren't represented in Parliament. They had their own assemblies. They wanted their own assemblies to tax them. That had nothing to do with philosophy, nothing to do with rationalism, nothing to do with anything.
Why do these things always come first? Did
They have
Lenin
to come
and
first in order.
Jefferson?
They have to come first in order for the philosophies to take hold. It has to be there, or else they'll die. Just like John Locke didn't become popular in England in the 17th when he first wrote his book. That didn't catch on. The English rising up for constitutional government because there was no reason for it. There was no dissent. That has to be there first before this philosophy can take on. It has to be there first.
So what you're concluding here is that people like Lenin and Jefferson said, well, the ball is rolling now. Let me see what I can find.
I say...
Let me see what we can pick up on. Because if these people get free, they say, I'm free, what do I do now? So they look to the literature?
They're not sincere. I'm not saying that Jefferson and Lenin is not sincere in their thinking. I'm not saying that they really don't believe that.
But they had to get their inspiration from somewhere. If it wasn't those people, it would be somebody else.
If we had the same society as England had, you think we would have rebelled? No way. There would have never been a rebellion here. We had the same type of society that England had. They would have never. We Americans, even at that time, completely different than the English were. I mean, you had people living in not so much along the East Coast, in the West, who didn't even like to be governed by the colonial assemblies. That's how individual they were. They didn't want any government ties at all. Nothing at all. That wasn't the American character. That was here way before the Revolution.
And where do you think that came from?
What? That came just from the situation here. They tried to rebuild the European society here. It wouldn't work. Not with the frontier.
But that came out.
That came out of no philosophy at all. That
people had their values. People had their values.
The values didn't work here. Every person who came over, every group, the Puritans, the Quakers, everybody who came over here, came over with the idea of recreating the old society that they had in England. But every time it failed. Because of the conditions in the New World were not suited for that type of society. The frontier, Turner, he's a famous historian. That's his thesis, and it's widely accepted. The frontier made the difference between the frontier ruined the old society that they tried to create here. It just couldn't, in these conditions here, it just wasn't built up. And that had nothing to do with any philosophy. That was very, very pragmatic on a day-to-day living basis. This character grew up. It had nothing to do with that. And there would have been a revolution where there was never a John Locke, but there was never a Rousseau, where there was never a Voltaire, any of them. Americans still would have revolted against it.
But you're talking about action without thought.
What?
You're talking about action without thought. And
What do you mean without thought? There was plenty of thought. They just didn't want to be taxed by England. That's thought. That had nothing to do with any abstract principles.
Values.
Philosophy
It has to do with values. My values is
I'm sorry, I don't agree with that.
Values come from philosophy.
Philosophies are abstract principles. Listen, the Westerner, the man who lived on the frontier, who was living day to day, trying to survive, could not give a damn about abstract principles. He didn't want to have any government down his neck. It's very simple. That was his values, created from his conditions, not created from any abstract. Philosophies are abstract principles. All right, some values, all right, can be drawn from that. But before, the Enlightenment, anything started being spread here, Americans were like that. They were very individualistic. The conditions made it like that. That was just trying to be survived. They had to be. It had nothing to do with any abstract principles. These values came from there. That's why I'm saying it came afterwards. Like I said before, we had the type of society that was suited for a democracy. Okay, that's why those the words Locke and Jefferson appeal to everybody. But don't forget, Jefferson, all those equality and all that went down the drain when it came down to practical things of writing a constitution. The Constitution was reactionary, it wasn't revolutionary. That's why the people didn't like it. They felt it undid everything that the revolution. It wasn't even democratic. The Constitution was not a democratic document. It wasn't intended to be. In fact, they hated democracy. No, not democracy. The people who founded this country, they hated it. So, I mean, the calling cry, they were screaming. You read John Adams, all of them, previous during the Revolution, was all they were talking about was democracy. When it came time, read the debates on the Constitution, all they did was condemn democracy. That all went out the window. That was fine during the Revolution. That's what I mean. Of course, it suited purposes at that time. Now they were getting down to the serious business of building the government, and it didn't work.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I enjoyed having you as my guest. And this is Derek Sanderson, hoping that all you listeners enjoyed the show. This is radio station WFRE. We're on the air Tuesday nights from 8 to 11 o'clock. This is Derek Sanderson saying goodnight from the New York Talkers.